The title of the discussion is The Thriving Publishing Scene on Tezos NFT Platforms. And without further ado, please give a warm round of applause for Johnny, Alex, Sasha, Katie, and your favorite hype man, NFTHypeman. Give him a round of applause.
You change your name to NFT Poetry Hype Man?
Good evening. Afternoon, I guess, perhaps. So I'll introduce myself first, and I'll get these guys to introduce themselves as well. This panel is loosely about NFT publishing because my name is Johnny Dean Mann. I'm the editor and publisher, I guess, of the, well, I'd like to say the original NFT magazine, but there is some debate about this.
Whoa.
So I've gotten many arguments about this, but we are probably the original Tezos publishing endeavor. Alex, any arguments to that?
Keep going.
Okay, good. Thank you. We've been going since June 2021. I think we're in our 70th issue this week. We publish weekly. We highlight 3 different artists every week and a piece of creative writing, which is important to me, being a writer myself. This writing section of the magazine has involved some of the people you see on stage tonight. And yeah, we also publish a quarterly literary journal called The Tickle Lit, which is purely creative writing, original creative writing, illustrated by some of the leading artists on Tezos too. So yeah, that's my 2 big projects, and I'll let everyone else introduce themselves before we start talking about it.
I think The Tickle is the original, but I'm biased because you published me. So, hi, my name is Katie Dozier. I'm an NFT poet, and I got into cryptocurrency about 10 years ago. I was really drawn to the decentralized world, and I always loved poetry, so I have sought to go ahead and put more poems on blockchains, and right now I like minting on Tezos the best.
Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Sasha Stiles. I'm really happy to be here with all these wonderful panelists. I'm a poet. I'm also an artist, and I am an AI researcher as well, which I can explain more later. But I do a lot of work with technology and text, bringing these 2 things together in a lot of different ways. I've been writing poetry my whole life. I'm a language and literature girl from way back, so I come from a pretty traditional background when it comes to writing. But I've been working with digital poetry for many years now. I've been working with generative text tools for a long time, and I've been in the crypto and the Web3 writing scene now for a few years. I am one of the co-founders of a poetry gallery that's dedicated to literary NFTs, and the gallery is called The Verseverse, and you can find out more about us at theverseverse.com. Again, we kind of focus on bridging the gap between the literary establishment, which is again where I come from, and the potential of the blockchain as a place to really revolutionize publishing in lots of different ways and really unlock new realms of creative potential for writers. I think there's been so much attention paid to what blockchain can do for artists, and you know, as an artist, I couldn't agree more that there's so much potential there. But I think the potential for blockchain, for writers, for publishing has been severely undervalued and is just sort of beginning to rise. So I'm really happy that we're here to talk about it. It's a very, very exciting area.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I'm NFTHypeman. Let's go, baby, to the moon. Yeah, so I've been Tezos. I was the Tezos guy before it was cool. I was like on Clubhouse chilling Tezos. Everyone was like, "Eve this, Eve that." I was like, "No, you got to check out this Tezos thing." And then, so to try to do it, I started a Hypeman Fund. You guys can, anyone that wants to check out Tezos, hypeman.pizza is the website. You can get free Tezos. I will give you free. We've done like 1,000+ people onboarded onto Tezos through that fund, which is super cool. I'm not a writer per se, so I don't know how I ended up on this stage with all these dope like writers that do this dope publishing stuff. I like to do my own poetry, my own like, notes on my iPhone, but
publish some.
Yeah, like I'll have to, but I've definitely been watching what you guys have been doing. I've definitely, especially since I'm sharing the stage, I kind of checked out everyone's Twitter profiles and everything. But yeah, it was cool to see ETH Poems doing their thing on chain, and then that kind of then now come onto Tezos. I'm bullish on Tezos, and yeah, it's super cool. I think we need to keep pushing decentralization, and not just decentralization on chain, but all forms of medium. And so it's great to see poetry, and I do music, and it's great to see PFPs and everything. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be joining the stage with all these amazing writers. To the moon.
Pleasure to be with you, NFTHypeman.
That's good.
I run a magazine called Right Click Save, which is all about principally NFTs and art, digital art. And I think probably the reason that I'm here is because I just want to celebrate Sasha Stiles, who I'm glad to see is sporting the right swag today. I think, joking aside, I think one of the striking things about Tezos and what's been going on this year is that I think there's been a lot of hype about Tezos, and there's been a lot of hype about NFTs. But of course, we're also living in a crypto crash, and in that context, we have to ask ourselves, why are we here? Well, the principal reason we're here is that NFTs allow us to find new markets for even old art forms such as poetry. And Sasha and the Verse have led this conversation this year. I have to say I was skeptical that we could have old art forms re-emerging in Web3, especially in this bear market. But you are living proof that that is not the case. So I think, yeah, from my perspective, it used to be that, we had Rare Pepe Wallet, we had Dada, we had early crypto art movements, which paved the way for contemporary NFT marketplaces. I was just in Barcelona the other day, and Joe Looney, who set up Rare Pepe Wallet, was there, and he was the first person to coin the term utility. And of course, utility is interesting because utility is principally a way for Web3 corporates to engage audiences in a new way. But of course, utility means that art has all of a sudden become functional again. So from my perspective, I think there is a broader conversation beyond the poetic, which reaches into crypto art, collectibles. And I think one of the things that we see in Web3 is this curious blurring of the lines between different categories that were previously separate. So collectibles, PFPs, fine art, NFTs, blockchain art, blockchain poetry. I don't even know if blockchain poetry is the language that Sasha and the Verse are comfortable with, but perhaps you can enlighten us.
We're working on the vernacular. I think we're constantly kind of debating what the right terms are, which is something that maybe all of us can get into a bit more. I don't know that we love being called necessarily just crypto writers or NFT writers or blockchain poets, because I think we're all writers in, first and foremost, and the medium in some ways doesn't matter, but in other ways it does matter. So yes, the vocabulary I think is part of that conversation, and as wordsmiths we are working on it.
I think there's also a unique set of challenges as a writer with NFTs in transforming what you would have been doing before as a traditional writer, and presenting that in a way that would be appealing as an NFT to be sold. You've seen a lot of different varying approaches, I think, from writers, and lots of media-rich attempts at putting across this skill, as you said, as an old world kind of art form. That was struggling a little bit, I think, in terms of general popularity, in terms of the cultural sphere. Poetry was perhaps sort of quite low on the menu. Maybe in mid-20th century, you have quite a few famous poets, household names almost. I know Sylvia Plath, Ted Hughes, that kind of thing, and it kind of dropped towards the end of the century, I think. And so, without sounding too grand, I think this is an opportunity, at the very least, to raise writing in general, and specifically poetry, up in the general kind of cultural consciousness. I think that I would say that was probably one of the aims of the Tickle. magazine and the Tickle Lit, and obviously also the Verse, I think, as well. And part of this process, I think, of promoting writing is one is onboarding. So we're getting traditional writers who don't really have any clue about technology necessarily, or NFTs in particular, and trying to get them on board. That's publishing houses, publishers, and agents maybe as well. It's just getting people involved. And I think it's just kind of changing the narrative slightly about how that's done. And I know that Katie herself is involved in this Rattle magazine, I think, that you were published in recently, and you're involved in. Maybe perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you're trying to sort of drag traditionally published poetry magazine into the Web3 space, perhaps.
Sure. I have a pretty simple way of going about it, which is I take magazines I'm going to submit to anyway, and in my cover letter, I talk about the Tickle, and I talk about how great NFT poetry is, and a lot of times they're really receptive to it. We need better ways of putting poetry out into the world, and even traditional publishers are aware of the potential for NFTs once they're just exposed to it. So it's really just exposing people to it. So Rattle magazine is one of the top poetry magazines, and they're going to be featuring crypto poetry in their summer 2023 issue, which is super exciting. And then you also have, like, Poetry Magazine is looking at, they're taking submissions for video poetry and really unconventional things that show progress in this way. So it's really a matter of exposing them to it and then offering to help, too, and to be part of the conversation and taking the time to explain. It's really a time and a hand-holding thing, because there's so many ways we can bring people into writing and poetry if we just talk to them and make friends and connections.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone kind of intrinsically and intuitively understands that poetry has value and has meaning. I think we all, we all use poems at really important moments in our lives. I mean, we use poems at weddings and funerals, and, everybody kind of sits up and gets choked up when someone like Amanda Gorman recites a poem at the inauguration. And, we understand how important the written word is and the spoken word, and we get that, but I think it's been really hard for a lot of writers and particularly poets, because we're all poets, to figure out how to then make that something that can be really a part of our life on a regular basis. It's really hard to make a living as a writer. It has been. It's very hard to make a living as a poet. And I think that, there's a few different things that we should touch on when it comes to the innovations of the blockchain in publishing, but one of them, of course, has to do with the transactability of language. And so now I think, we're realizing that there is this ability to concretize, in a way, the value of a poem in a way that has never been possible before in really the history of this art form, which is pretty incredible. And that has potential to revolutionize not just the lives of poets and writers themselves, but also the ecosystem of literary magazines and publishing houses. There's so much here. And when I think about, the potential, the scale for the transformation here, I think about the fact that the global art market is actually half the size of the global publishing market. And what we've seen happen, these disruptions that have happened, seismic disruptions in the way we think about creativity due to art NFTs. I mean, I think that that's on the cusp of happening in a very big way with literature as well. The other thing that I kind of want to focus on is the sort of the creative transformation that blockchain is enabling for publishing and for writers. I think, there's a writer named Ismail Kadare who has said that there's really only been one major transformation in the history of literature, that we've gone from an oral tradition to the written language, and that was a huge fundamental shift and changed everything. It changed everything about how we communicate, how we pass stories down from generation to generation, how we archive information. And I think that we're all very excited about this moment that we're in now, because it genuinely feels like we are on the cusp of another major paradigm shift. This change from written language that is, language that is two-dimensional, that's on a printed page in lots of ways, or on a screen, what happens when that language can come to life in different ways and become mediated through different through senses, bringing in different technological tools, bringing in, like I do, these AI-powered writing tools that really change the way that that I write and the way that I kind of get inspired. I think all of these elements, these technological elements, are coming together to really present a very radical change in what it means to be a writer, what it means to read something, how it feels to author something, and even the very forms that we consider literature. So it's a really again, like, it's a really profound change, I think, that's in the offing.
And it's a very simple point, but one that's worth remembering, I think, is that in the art world, it's very common to own a painting. You own a drawing, you buy it, you put it on your wall, and it's yours. But this notion of owning a poem has not really been about so much, or at all. So the fact that this whole shift where you can actually own a piece of writing nowadays, and particularly with the generative platforms, I know, and many of you will be familiar with FXhash. There are a lot of writing projects. Myself and Sasha have got writing projects on FXhash, which are generative and which produce unique works, which you then own. There have been computational poets, of course. There are various ways in which you can use data as poetry. Ross Goodwin, for example, who's a friend of the Verseverse, is famous for this. Sasha has obviously been involved in this before, but the sense of actually owning a poem has never really been about before, and I just think that that's kind of quite a profound shift for publishers, for editors, for writers, and it's a very new thing, and we're still getting our heads around it a little bit, I think. And the Tickle particularly is very excited about that, and we've been trying to push poetry right from the very beginning, because the fundamental kind of principles of the NFT, it's surrounded by a lot of bad press a lot of the time, but that kind of basic principle of being able to own a piece of culture and then to empower the creators with royalties and such is a really important point, I think.
Yeah, I'm like really enjoying just this conversation, just hearing from you guys, because predominantly I do a lot of music, so there's a lot of writing that comes into pushing out music, but something which is an issue with music, which I guess is shared with the poetry space, is that as a medium for trying to gain attention is not necessarily social media friendly in many ways, as maybe like images are, or like PFPs, of course. Like PFP is predominantly one of the, has dominated the NFT space, at least in terms of like capital, the last year or so. But I guess that's largely due to the fact that it's so easily shared. So yeah, I guess even from me, I wanted to come here and hear how you guys have been dealing with the challenge of poetry, how to share that as a medium and to gain attention. But there's such a great power in poetry and in words, in being able to be, I think, at least for myself as an artist, one of my things which I strive for is not necessarily money, but it's legacy, right? Like, I want to have a legacy. I want to have my music preserve, and even in today's world, a lot of the artists that we consume, the only reason we are able to consume them is because their works have been preserved. There's many like artists over the generations which we don't know how much art we've lost as humanity, because we don't know whether or not the estate of that family or the artist family have preserved the works, whereas now it's so amazing that you can have your works preserved on chain. And so it's not just, again, it's not hosted somewhere, but especially words. You can host your words on chain, and that can be there as long as the blockchain exists. And I think there's such a powerful tool for that, which has never existed before in humanity, where you can pay like a simple processing fee of like however many Tez it is, or whichever chain you're on. But in poetry, there's so much power when it comes to that. So I think that's just such a great tool.
I think one of the striking things is one of the reasons that art was the proof of concept for NFTs was that it wasn't just any old art. It was basically memes that were tokenized. It was Rare Pepe, or it was very bold, often rather kind of raw coloring. And it seems to me like there is something kind of potentially viral about crypto art and potentially music. And I wondered whether in the 3 minutes 51 that we have, whether there was perhaps a way in which poetry is somehow adapted to that potential virality, because from my perspective, what's interesting what we're seeing develop is FX Hash has just developed a new platform called FX Text, which is basically a way of tokenizing words, ideas, articles. But one of the curious things about the digital condition is that basically ideas are shared, reshared, and frankly, plagiarism is central to the Web3, frankly, digital condition. So I think from my perspective, what I'm interested in as far as where we are going forward is, do we need viral forms of poetry to have success? And is it possible to marketize ideas in a digital context in which, to be honest, owning one's ideas is almost a contradiction in terms, since someone's going to share it or reshare it anyway?
I think like that's exactly why poetry is really poised to be very powerful in this space. There's so much noise, there's so much content, there's so much out there, and poetry is purpose-built by design to cut through that and really stick in the memory and be like that kernel of that which is most important. I mean, it's really meant to be like the essential material that we want to carry forward. So I think it's maybe that's why that there's this resonance really when it comes to needing something to latch onto. Poetry feels like it's very impactful in a way that other forms may not be. I think there's also a lot of really beautiful, deep-rooted resonance between poetry and technology, even though they seem quite counterintuitive at first, but I think the more that I've brought text and technology together, the more I realize that poetry is a kind of code, that poetry is a technology in and of itself, and that poetic devices like meter and rhyme and rhythm and assonance and all these things are little programs that we've built to make language easier to remember. And I feel like there's something that intuitively a lot of creative coders and a lot of people working in this space really understand that code is a kind of language, that poetry is a kind of code, and really, I don't know, I think there's something about that makes it poised for that kind of virality, and society needs more poetry, so hopefully this is a very good thing.
Yeah.
I think there's such a especially like I'm sure everyone's watching the AI space and being able to use prompts, but yeah, I'm super fascinated to see how you utilize that, other poets utilize that, how that moves forward. Like that's a new medium of art that hasn't existed before, being able to like prompt AI, to generate work, and like then using poetry to now prompt AI, which is like crazy, which is again has never existed before. So we have new forms of media that are starting to come to exist, and yeah, like it's amazing just to be a part of it and be in the mix and watch it all like evolve.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things with really pushing forward the poetry as part of the publishing scene on Tezos was to just refamiliarize people, I think, with the reading poetry. Because you ask people about poetry and they say, "Oh, I don't know about poetry. I can't say whether that's good or not. I don't know." Whereas with art, everyone's got an opinion and they can say, "Oh, that's good, it's not." And so it's kind of bringing that back into the kind of consciousness, I guess, of just culture and trying to, just refamiliarize people with the form, because it's not lost. Like it's interesting that you mentioned music, actually, because all songs are poetry, and people forget that.
Yeah, exactly. But even more so, like just expanding on that, like we're all English, Anglo-speaking, but there's like many other languages which prioritize poetry, and like I'm Russian-speaking, so like in Russian, like you like most Russian, Ukrainian, whoever, if you grew up in the Eastern Bloc, you learn poetry as a kid, right? And that's very important in your upbringing. And I think like as well, it's like that's the great thing about Tezos. It's so decentralized. There's so many different cultures and different languages and different things going on there. Like I'm excited just to, I'm gonna definitely delve in more as to see what's going on like in the English-speaking space, but also in everything else that's going on. But yeah, you guys have been doing such a great job, so please keep it up, and I'm excited to see what develops and what tools keep coming out of this.
I could easily speak longer about this, but we're being confronted by a big angry red zero telling us that we should stop talking. And he looks like he's going to tell me to shut up soon as well, so I guess I should shut up. Thank you to Alex, to Hypeman, to Sasha, to Katie for coming, and thanks to you guys for coming as well.
Thanks, everyone.